This is the final episode in the first series of the RJM Classic Motorcycles podcast. This week we're doing away with our regular format to interview a customer-turned-friend who granted us the privilege of restoring his 1955 Triumph Thunderbird. He himself also took a hands-on role in much of the restoration process. I should point out that early on you hear the sound of the rain bouncing off of the caravan roof where we were recording, as well as a car horn in there somewhere, so do keep an ear out for those. In all seriousness, we've been using some pretty basic equipment to record these podcasts, so if and when we do another run of episodes, we'll be sure to upgrade to something a bit more professional. If you like, you can visit our website at rjmclassic.com or email me specifically about the podcast at rjmpodcast@gmail.com. Anyway, without further ado, let's meet Jeremy. I started by asking him how he got into motorcycling in the first place, specifically who influenced him and what bikes he's owned over the years.
My main inspiration, I suppose, would be my father, my late father, purely because of all the stories I heard as a kid growing up, of my mother and father's early courting days, as they called it, what we would now call dating. And because of that, hearing the stories about, your father went here, there and everywhere on his Triumph Thunderbird. I think when his first motorbike was a BSA single cylinder, a 500cc, which he said nearly broke his leg on many occasions trying to start it.
B50 always noted as being a nightmare to start.
Absolutely.
But interestingly enough, as a side note, he always remembered the registration number, RRO20. But anyway, he was my main inspiration, or gathered the interest in motorcycling, and from then, although it was never actually encouraged in me, when I got to the age of 16, all the boys at my school were, they were getting on mopeds and they were graduating from their bicycles onto mopeds. It was a thing to do. Of course, it came together. I suppose you could say it was in my DNA.
It's always a worrying time for parents when the kids want to get on motorcycles. But if they've ridden themselves, what ground have they got to stand on?
It's it. And that's exactly how I played it with them, because initially it was like, oh no. And then I said, but there's an RAC ACU Gold Star training course going on at the local off-air council.
I did that one.
Yeah,
in St Albans.
You know it, and because it was Sunday mornings practical in the county hall car park, and Wednesday nights theory, so you had to sit and attend lessons at Manda College on a Wednesday evening.
Oh my goodness, that's posh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had a couple of hours on a Sunday morning in the Civil Defence car park at the back of Chequers Cinema.
So because of that, I said, look, if I do that, can I have a bike? And so my mum said, all right, okay. And my dad was fine with it. And that's where it all started. Bearing in mind this was the early 70s, mid-early 70s, I think. 76? No, I'm not sure anyway. But it was the period of the Fizzy and the Suzuki AP50, all the two-strokes. And Honda came out with a four-stroke. And basically, the four-stroke was more available than the two-stroke. The two-strokes looked a bit more laddish, and I think my parents thought, the Honda looks a better idea. And so yes, that was the first. It was a cable-operated front disc brake, UBM 698R, and it opened up a whole vista of adventure for me, going places, even on a little 50cc engine. So I had that, and then of course naturally you get to 18 and you see your mates on bigger bikes, and you get a taste. You borrow a RD200 or you borrow something, you think, my God. So I saved, and I fell in love with a Honda CB400N Super Dream, which was the Euro-styled version of the more rounded tank version of the Super Dream. And again, I saw it at the Earls Court Motor Show, bike show. I thought, that's the one for me. And ironically, note to the future, the one that I actually lusted after was shown at the show with crash bars, fairing on it, and side bags, so panniers and a top box. I thought, that could go everywhere. I want that, And that came, I say it's a note to the future, but and I'll come on to that in a minute. But I had that for a couple of years, went to the TT on it several times, 700, all that sort of thing, and had some adventures. I never did get the saddlebags or the fairing for it, so tooled around all over the place. And after that, the next bike, again, was inspired by the TT. The Marshalls, on the last year I was there, it was 84, were riding around on the then just released Honda VF750F, which was this red, white, and blue sort of vision of sportiness with a 16-inch front wheel, and I thought they looked the bizzo. And it was a V4, and it was something Honda had made as a result of not doing very well with the previous V4, which had the chocolate camshafts of legend.
Oh, right.
And it was an American-style bike, the previous iteration, and so they came out with a more Euro sporty-looking bike. And I thought saw these Marshalls flying around, and I thought, they're the nuts. I'm having one of those if I can.
I just realised that you were doing the TT at around about the same time as I was marshalling for the Manx Grand Prix.
No way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think my first TT venture was 83, or it might have been 82, I cannot remember. I went on my own. Anyway, I just camped 2 weeks, had a lovely time, practice and race week, it was awesome. And I actually had sunshine the whole time. Even the locals were saying, we never get this. And I came home with a suntan, everyone thought I'd gone abroad. So the VF 750F I duly acquired after quite a bit of saving. I got that in 1984. And again, it opened up all sorts of vistas of high-speed jinks and neck risking. Because obviously at that age you are completely immortal. You're never going to die.
We all know.
Yes, and all sorts of things. But proud to say I never dropped it.
Perfect.
And despite several attempts probably, and so I had that right up until I did a big European tour with my mate Alan with a single plan, which was go to Calais, turn right. And we did that. Basically, it was 2 weeks of let's see what happens if we go there.
Wow.
And we turned right at Calais, and he was on the back, or we'd swap piloting duties. And we headed south. Got to the south. Well, that's the coast, right? Let's ride along the coast, round to Italy, up into Bavaria and Germany, and around through Germany. And when we got as far as the Luxembourg border, when a tiny weeny little 60-pence spring inside the gearbox failed, I later found out, and it froze in second gear.
Wow.
So my 35 quid on the AA Euro recovery policy paid out, luckily.
And money well spent.
It was. They brought the bike home about a couple of weeks later. We had a hired car that day, and we managed to get home a couple of days later, which was excellent. And they brought the bike back and needed a complete engine strip to get to this tiny little spring. Yep.
That's progress.
That's progress. Yes. So we anyway, I got it back. It was Bryant's of Biggleswade that did the job. That's now gone, and they did a lovely job on it. And I had that right up until, as a result of the Euro tour, I had this lust to do a bigger tour, a bigger adventure. And I've been thinking, I want to go to America. I really want to see America, ride around. And I didn't care on what bike or anything at that point. I just wanted to, I've lived this kind of dream in my head of wanting to see the Wild West and stuff like that, thinking it would never be possible. And then one day I saw a tiny little 2-inch by 2-inch advert in the back of Superbike magazine. And it said, it was a graphic, it just said, ride the Wild West with a picture of a cactus, a saguaro cactus. And I thought, oh, that looks like the sort of place I want to go. As a kid being brought up on Bonanza, and Hoss Cartwright's hat and all that sort of thing. And I thought, yes, that's what I want to do. So I wrote to the guy, because it was his pre-fax, pre-email, everything. I wrote to him, and he wrote back. And chap's name was Frank Del Monte, and he was then working full time as a computer engineer scientist, and he wanted to do guided tours of the desert Southwest full time, but was starting this as a pilot thing. So, long story short, after several communications backwards and forwards, I eventually sold the VF 750. Took the money from that and everything else I had, and I sent it out to Frank. And bear in mind, we'd never met.
No.
We'd only exchanged letters.
This is before PayPal and things like that.
I literally got, I think it was a money order, sent it out to Frank, and I just had this gut feeling. I thought, this guy is solid. He told me all about himself in an introductory letter. He was a founder of the International Norton Owners Association. His UN, was it? UN01 is his number plate. So I thought, and he's ex-Air Force. I thought, this guy is solid. I can trust him. And I flew out there on the given date. And what had happened was, in the meantime, instead of being allowed to buy a fleet of bikes to rent out, which was the intention, he couldn't get the finance for whatever reason. The banks had said no. And so he said, look, you send me the money. I'll buy the bike for you, whatever I can find within your budget.
Wow.
So I said, aim for a Harley, because I thought, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, ignoring everybody else.
You bought a chariot.
Yes. well, well said. But I just thought, hell with it. Everyone says, oh, Harleys don't do this, they don't do that. Da, 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 da. Well, I thought, no, and that's kind of my personality, really. I thought, well, I'm not going to listen to you lot. I'm going to do what I think.
Fair enough.
And I thought, it's America. Let's do what they do. And admittedly, my budget wasn't sufficient to buy a Harley. I didn't think. And Frank did say at the time, he said, I'll struggle, but we'll look, because they were as rare as hen's teeth then to buy second hand.
Right.
And there weren't even sufficient bikes to be in the showrooms. They were struggling for supply. So, long story short, again, when I sent all the money out there, Frank had managed to track down a 3-year-old Electroglide Classic, which is the 2-wheeled sofa of Harley World, with the tour trunk on it, and the big panniers, and the big fairing, the stereo cassette, the floorboards, the whole bananas. And when I got to his house, in fact, no, let me tell you, when I met him for the first time at the airport, I was thinking, I've come all this way, 2 flights, and landed in this most unusual looking place at like sunset, and it just looks hot looking out the aircraft window.
Where did you fly into?
Phoenix.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thank you, in Arizona.
Yeah.
And Frank was waiting for me, and he was holding up this T-shirt, and he was holding up this T-shirt, sort of shoulder level high, and bouncing it up and down. And on the front it said, "I own a Harley, not just a T-shirt." I thought, we will get on. Great sense of humour.
Yeah.
And went to his house, and he opened up the garage door, and he said, pick yourself a bike, ha ha. And leaning on its side stand next to would be my bike was his, and he'd only recently bought a 1989 or 90 version of almost identical, the same thing, Electroglide Classic, and they almost looked identical, same colour. It was pure accident. Mine, when we got it, was from a guy who had it 3 years. They had 11,000 miles on the clock, and in Harley terms, that's not running. No. That turned into a long-term relationship, because Frank since became one of my best friends ever, and he was able, after the 4 weeks I toured around on it, I was working for myself then, I fell in love with the countryside, I fell in love with the people, the whole vista that opened up, the wide open spaces. I thought, this is so me, and I thought, this is just wonderful, this is all I want to do. And so end of the 4 weeks, instead of selling the bike, which was the idea, and then having a bike back in the UK again, I thought, no, I can't do that. I've been to the Grand Canyon, I've been to all these places. I can't do that. So Frank said, come back in December. We'll go to Death Valley. I thought, have to. There was no question, have to. So that's how it started. I left the bike with him. Frank went on to open up a full-blown bike rental business. He was one of the very first people to do it in America. Pre-Harley ride in and ride out thing, all that sort of stuff. A business which eventually sold on, but after many years of going backwards and forwards to ride the bike, go off somewhere else with it, I brought it back home, so I still have that one, and I've had many adventures on it since. And it was actually the foundation of my wanting to get more heavily involved in wrenching, fixing, fettling, and from that's kind of where it led me to the door of wanting to do something different, having got sort of knuckles deep in oil with the Harley and stripping an Electroglide Classic to its bare frame and building it back up. I thought, well, I'm fascinated to do a British bike, and the only British bike I want to do first is a Triumph Thunderbird, because of my father.
It's been interesting hearing your progression of the bikes you've ridden and things you've done, because it seems like you've always gone bigger and better and bigger and better. And then you decided to scale back very much to your roots and your origins in motorcycling with the Thunderbird. How did that come about initially?
I think fundamentally it was because of the motorcycle that my father had, and if his first bike had been something else, that would have been the bike I'd have gone for. So it was that's the main inspiration, and the stories that I'd heard. And when I look back now with kind of more mature eyes, as it were, I think about particularly the story of how when my father was a young married man doing his national service in the RAF, and how they'd sent him up to East Kirby, which I gather is near Liverpool, and they were living in a small little flat in my mum and dad in Hitchin in Hertfordshire, and because he was a married man, he was allowed out of camp on a Friday night, and he had to be back Sunday night without fail on time. So on his Triumph Thunderbird, he would set off on a Friday night from East Kirby, ride all the way down to Hitchin, and Sunday night go all the way back again. And I worked that out. It's approximately 400 miles round trip.
Oh my gosh.
In the 50s. And now that I've had the pleasure of riding and experiencing what it's like to be on that particular machine, I can see why it's the perfect machine for the job.
Yeah.
It's got the correct manners, it's got the right kind of feel to it. So it's got everything in that era I think he would have needed to cover those sort of distances without it being a pain. Bearing in mind, of course, this is pre-comfortable clothing and all that sort of stuff.
Well, and pre-decent roads.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, there's one or two bits around here of the old, I think it's probably the A5, that are still as I remember them from the 60s, but not much of it. So, but it serves to illustrate just how lousy the roads were back then.
Yes, my father did tell me a story that one time he was heading back late at night, and he said I got a bit carried away. He said, and I looked down. He said I was doing nearly 100 miles an hour, and he said I thought I'd better stop that. And he saw a bike following him for some distance, and he thought it must be a copper. I'm going to get pulled over. And he said this bloke followed him and followed him and followed him. He said eventually the policeman pulled him over, and he thought, my dad thought, right, I'm in for it now. And policeman said to him, no, he said I only wanted to stop you to look at your Thunderbird, because we're getting those next. The policeman was on a speed twin.
Speed twin, yeah, absolutely.
He said we're getting those next, and we'll just see what he was like. So,
what was the acquisition? I mean, the bike you now own and that's been restored. What was the acquisition process like?
Well, I think lucky in lots of regards, because I did it through eBay.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I'd been poring over the classifieds in various bike magazines, and once I decided I was focusing on that bike, hopefully in that year, I knew the colour didn't matter, but it would help. And I'd had a search out on eBay for some time, hoping that something would come up, and to a large extent I wasn't too worried about the cost, thinking it would just good to get one and get going with it. And so it came through eBay. I phoned the guy up, had a chat with him, and he claimed that the bike had been in his father's front room, sent me a photograph. I think it was a photograph on eBay of it literally on its centre stand in on somebody's carpet.
Yeah.
In what looked like a front room.
With an oil tray underneath.
Yeah, I can't remember, but yeah, anyway, the gentleman involved apparently had a sort of side business or something to do with restoring Triumph Thunderbirds, and he reckoned his father had had it for 9 odd years. The logbook says it's had at least 10 different owners before, and it had someone had sold the original number plate, which is a bit of a shame.
That's a shame.
Yeah. I actually do know, not off the top of my head, the original number, because I found it in ghost, as it were, on the back of the original front number plate.
Didn't we try and decipher that together?
We did, yeah. We still haven't got it nailed down.
It's one of about 3 things, is it?
It is, yes, and neither of which come back to the DVLA. But yeah, so I did a deal with the guy in terms of he was coming up to do an auto jumble somewhere up the north, and he said, look, I'll put it in the back of a van, £100 deposit, if you don't like it, you lose your £100. It covers my diesel. So I thought, well, okay. He is coming right to my door. So that's how it happened. He delivered it off. We'd agreed a price, and that was it. Happy days.
Wow.
So that's. But when I got it, although it was, as you rightly say, Ray, it was all there. It looks better in the photographs than at that time than it actually was.
Yeah, but I mean, even so, a lot of folk would have ridden it from that point forward. I mean, it really wasn't, in the global scheme of things, it was no dog.
No, but it certainly wasn't safe.
Okay.
And as I was to find out the day that I showed it to my father, because I mean, there was so much about it that was completely knackered. The brakes, it was bathed in oil and grunge and stuff, and as I say, the inspiration was basically to find one to surprise me further, and B, to get him involved or interested in the restoration process, so he's got something of interest to talk about. And at that point I knew no better than to think I was going to do it all myself, all at home in the garage. He can come by and spend as much time as he likes talking about it, and I was hoping to extract more memories from him as a result. And so the day that I decided to do the big reveal yielded a nice little example of how it really wasn't ready or safe for the road, because my father at that point was still able to get out and about in his little car, and he'd been to somewhere, and he was on his way home, and I said, look, come round, I'm doing some work on the Harley, I want to show you something. All right. He said, I'll pop over.
Oh, so at this point he's got no idea?
None at all. No.
Okay.
And I got the bike, got the Triumph, I got it under a tarpaulin cover. So he comes around, we go in the garage, and I said, I've got something else to show you. He said, well, what's that then? And I said, it's under that sheet. So I pulled the sheet off, and he stood there and he said, is that what I think it is? I said, yes, it is. I said, it's not your bike, which was ONM 632. I said, but it is from the same, I reckon from around about the same time frame, in the 55/56. It was very hard to pin it down to the exact one, but from the only photographs existing of his bike, it is 99.9% the same build year.
Sure, because that was first year swinging on, wasn't it?
That's right. Yes. So he was blown away, which was the idea, and I told him what we were going to do.
Yeah.
And that was, and he said, "Oh, great!" So he wanted to get as involved as possible with it, and so I said, "Should we get it going?" He said, "Yeah, come on." So we wheeled it out on the driveway. Our enthusiasm was overwhelming our common sense.
Had to be done.
And got it. Managed to get it started, and we were standing there going, hey, isn't this great? Grinning like a couple of fools. And my father's got his walking stick, and he had bad eyesight because of the various problems he got associated with diabetes. But he spotted it before I did. As the bike sat sitting there chugging away happily, he sort of aimed his walking stick in the general direction of the engine and said, is it supposed to be doing that? And I went, what? And I looked down, and I could see that the petrol fuel pipe had detached itself quite nicely from the main tap,
Yeah.
and it was gushing fuel all over a lovely hot engine.
Yeah.
So
That could have been the end of the project right there, couldn't it?
and the two cars parked next to it and the house.
Oh, no.
So I thought, well, there's only one thing to do. I thought I must switch it off, and then I realised that there was no kill switch mounted anywhere, but a simple former kind of button attached to a wire, which I think if I jam that into the frame and pray there isn't a spark, we might just earth it, and that might just stop it. So that's what I did. Turned the fuel off, rammed this thing into a piece of frame, and thankfully it died.
There we go.
Without me going with it.
Oops.
So lesson learned.
So tell us about the early stages of the restoration, and then how we came to be involved.
Well, I should say right from the off, having sort of dabbled with very amateur sort of home mechanics, and finally finding a house that I could set myself up a bit more efficiently with a hydraulic ramp and do what I'd always dreamed of, which is have a proper workspace area. I thought I was going to be able to do this all myself, and soon found out that I was way out of my depth. But in a way, I kind of hoped that would happen, because I thought, well, this is all about the learning for me. The joy of doing it is in the learning, and then seeing the end result. And I was hoping I wouldn't make too many cock-ups along the way. But I soon found out, as I was doing the disassembly and cataloguing everything and cleaning things as best I could along the way, and taking millions of digital photographs, I soon cottoned on to the fact that this is too much. I didn't have the equipment, or most importantly, the experience or the skills to do many of the tasks that needed doing. So I thought, I've got to reach out to somebody. And
at this point, I should say, a lot of people would press ahead anyway and end up with a completely disastrous result.
I mean, it's a very daunting prospect when you see an engine in a frame nicely, and then suddenly when it's all in bits, you've got about 6 boxes full of it.
Yes.
Where do you start exactly?
Yes. I mean, I'd always been interested in twirling the spanners, as it were, from an early age, and my grandfather once taught me how to take the cylinder head off an old Jap-engined lawnmower and decoke it, and I was fascinated from there on. And my grandparents were all engineers and stuff, so in some respects it was in the blood. But I've always been fascinated in it, and I loved the notion of just fixing anything, taking it apart, learning about it, putting it back together better, or making it work. And I'd done a total frame-off restoration on the Harley, so I thought, well, I should be able to do this. But again, I knew there were things I just would not have the skill for. Assembly, yes, to a degree, and even then there's lots of nuances to that I later learned. But once I got the disassembly down to taking the engine out, I took the cylinder head off, I looked at it and I thought, no, I really want a perfect end result, and an end result that you can be proud of, that won't be falling apart.
Sure. And
because I had a customer in mind, I had my father in mind, and I thought, I wanted to be right for him, even though he was never going to ride it, and I knew that. I kind of wanted it to be just right first time, as near as damn it. So that's when I thought, right, I need to find an expert, and I think the first step was looking in Classic Bike magazine, where I saw your advert, and I'd seen it month in, month out, and it wasn't until I realised you were local, and I thought, that means a great deal, because of a previous experience where the chap had not been local to me, and it really got difficult, should we say, without going into detail. So I thought, they're local, we can talk, we can meet. If I go there and I don't like the look, I can just back off. I haven't wasted a day.
Sure. And
I knew nothing about you till the day I phoned you up. I spoke to you, Ray, and we had this conversation, and you filled me full of confidence.
That's nice, thank you.
You did, because you basically said there's nothing we can't tackle, and you knew instantly about the engine's era and how it could possibly be either shell bearings or white metal bearings on the crank, according to where they were in the era of putting it together at the factory at that time.
This is the difference between separate white metal shells and the white metal actually being laid directly on the conrod and the bearing cap, which is normally known as babbited.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, as we were to find out, and you said, look, just bring the engine over. And initially I was just thinking, I'll just do the engine. I should be able to manage everything else. So I brought the engine over, and you said, right, I'll do a complete, I'll do an assessment of it, and then we'll go from there, and I'll let you know what it really needs. So I thought, good, okay. So I started to focus on getting everything ready and seeing what state and condition it was in. And then, for example, the rear mudguard had a bracket completely missing.
Oh.
And I thought, don't want to replace the mudguard. All we need is a new bracket. But when I studied the a replacement bracket and looked at the way the bracket was shaped, I thought that was much more involved. And I thought, no, I'm never going to be able to make one of those on my own. It'll need to be welded on. So again, conversation with Ray transpired that I brought all the tins over as well, because Ray had the contacts. He knew the people who could go to. We could have a face-to-face conversation with real people, as it were, as opposed to down the phone line with someone I've not met.
Sure.
And at that point, Bourne Brothers were on site.
This was the now sadly no longer in business. The larger unit on our site here was formerly the premises of Bourne Brothers Motors Limited, who were accident repairers, but also notably the by now retired senior partner was a active member of the local vintage motorcycle club, And so his workshop were used to doing paintwork and tinware repairs on that era of machine.
Well, as it transpired, I mean, I did a drawing of the bracket. I think you and I conferred, Ray, and we both agreed that it was a one-shot wonder to actually make it, to fix it in the right place, and hope that when we got to the day of assembly, the two holes would line up either side of the to fix through the top suspension mounts.
Yeah, I think by the time it was actually one was fabricated and reattached, we'd have been jolly unlucky for it not to have fitted. But there's always that worry. You get it all nicely finished in paint, and yeah.
But as a mark, really, to me, what's always stuck out, it's a mark of the quality of the workmanship over at Bourne's, and that was only down to the fact that you got the contacts there. I would not have found them in a million years. They were able to, keep the tinware that was on the bike. The front mudguard was bashed to hell. They managed to make it look perfectly serviceable and perfectly usable, and we could retain the rear mudguard, and they did a brilliant job on that tricky looking bracket, because there's quite an offset on it, and the tank. The tank was sound, and so everything in that regard couldn't have been better, and that's really why it was such a what's the word? It was the beginning of something really amazing. Because again, I got to have a in-depth kind of a hands-on approach with you guys to rebuilding it, so I was involved at every step,
and that's something we've always tried to replicate, is to go in a system that sort of mirrors the sort of progress that someone would be making themselves at home. And not everybody has an interest in the process, but
no, that's deeply frustrating. But recognising that whether you're doing it at home or whether you've got a professional involved to a greater or lesser extent, it is nonetheless always going to be a lengthy process, as well as, I would have to say, an expensive one. But that the process, whether you're doing it at home or whether you're having it done professionally, is part of the process. So where somebody is more heavily reliant upon us to share with them everything we're doing, it gives them a more complete association with the vehicle when it's finally done.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all the more exciting for us when the customer, for lack of a better word, wants to take and does take a hands-on role in it, and you were a perfect example of that. You did some bits, we did some bits.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the point that the whole approach was twofold. Obviously, I was doing it for somebody. I wanted to give my father the bike back that he had to give up when he was a young married man, and he knew my elder sister was coming along, and he traded in his beloved bike, which I know when it's what it's like when you've got to give up a motorcycle. I get attached to them. That's why I've still got the Harley, even though common sense said I got rid of it long ago. But I am completely emotionally attached to it because of where I've been with it and the fun I've had. So I get like that with all the bikes, but particularly with the Triumph. So I knew it must have been a wrench for him to trade that in and get a little Ford Popular. Apparently, was what he got. So it was nice to give something back to him, but also I really, really wanted to get involved with actually doing the process and learning, and I'd never tackled a British bike, so I needed to learn all the different ways of the Imperial versus US Imperial versus metric and things like that. So big part was the journey, was the learning and seeing it come together, because I do enjoy that whole sort of, it's this step followed by that step followed by this, until you actually start to see the end product emerge. That for me is a big thrill.
And when you're as involved in the process as you were when you're actually riding the bike, isn't that empowering?
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'd wonder sometimes whether classic motorcycle owners who, for example, have just literally bought the machine as a restored vehicle and then ride it, and very often without knowing who the the local good guys are, must ride around in fear and trepidation of what's going to go wrong next and who the hell's going to fix it.
Yes, absolutely. And well, if you'd wanted to, if I wanted to do that, you can buy a Honda from your local dealers. You get on it, press the button, off you go. Yeah. So, no, that's never been for me. In the sense of once you've, as you say, you know every square, inch of the bike. You know how it goes, what it says. As you're riding along, you can fully appreciate everything that's gone into it. Unfortunately, there is one side effect I've noticed, is that you become very aware of noises and sounds.
Yeah. You're constantly in diagnosis mode, aren't you?
You are, yes, indeed.
But that also within itself brings a level of mechanical sympathy, which helps preserve the life of the vehicle immeasurably.
As they always do, the restoration process threw up all the usual difficulties one would expect, but it soon came time to give the machine a first run-up, which you can watch on YouTube if you search for RJM Classic, one word. That's our channel, and you can see Jeremy's beaming grin and slapping himself on the wrist for giving it a rev. What was the tail end of the process like?
Well, it never actually ends, does it? Because the restoration process comes to an end, and then you start learning to live with the bike and riding the reliability back into it, to use my well-worn expression. What was that like?
Well, it's again, and it is absolutely true, Ray, that you continue, if you like, it's like a third act. You've gone through the initiation of finding it, buying it, taking it apart. The middle act is the restoration, and then the third act is just that, is finding what its quirks are, how it likes to be started. I would say on that video, the way I'm trying to start it then is completely different to how I've learned it likes to be started now, and now it is a piece of cake. It's seriously, it's so easy to start, so gentle and easy to start. It's half a kick. It's not a full kick. You don't start from the top of the arc with a kick start. You bring it halfway down.
Wow.
You bring it half the way down, little whiff of throttle, and then you, as it says, actually in the manual, you follow through.
Yeah.
It says press smartly.
Yes.
It says, smart or something like that. And it was the first time I thought, well, I'll try this, and it was a revelation as I got it into kickstart into position, and then depressed started through the following sort of 45 degrees of arc or whatever it is. It starts into life and very rarely needs choke.
Yeah.
Especially this time of year. And this morning when I started it up, no choke at all. Happy days.
You do see at the various shows and what have you, an awful lot of people making much heavier weather of starting classic motorcycles than need be. And it's important to remember there's only you and the machine. There is no engine management system that's going to help you out one little bit.
No. So yes, I learned as one example about the starting process. But the excitement, the interest, finally getting to have as you called it, Ray, a bit of a wobble up the road. The first time we went off was pretty special, and I have to say, even to this day, I get a massive thrill. I get rolling on it, and I think I shouldn't be doing anything else in my life right at this moment but doing this. Yeah. And you can talk yourself out of going for a ride, but when I'm out on that Thunderbird, everything else just disappears in the breeze.
It is almost a biblical experience, isn't it? When you're riding something that is that well sorted, that nice, and that old, with that much history before it ever got to you.
Yes. Ooh. Yes. Riding the reliability in is very apt. Day one, I worked out I'd got the front brake done up a smidge too tight, but also I hadn't fully appreciated such things as the way the front brake works in relation to the movement of the front forks, and how there's a rod which sits in parallel to the front fork leg, and the front brake cable passes through said rod to the lever. The rod also needs to move freely through the travel of the fork trouser.
It's quite an odd setup, isn't it?
It is, and mine was just binding on a tad that day, the first day out,
Yeah.
on my own, nervous, little hazardous, oh my God, everything's on the opposite side. And I thought, I'll go somewhere really quiet, country lane near me for a wobble. And I thought, what's that smell? Oh my God. And I looked down, I could see the front brake was smoking. I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
And I'd overheated because it was binding slightly because the rod wasn't able to travel. And again, that is all part of the riding the reliability. It is understanding why things do the way they do. Even though you feel like you've put it together to perfection with lots of diligence, ultimately there are things it needs to teach you, the owner, about how it likes to be treated. And so that's how I came to realise that for instance, unfortunately I blistered all the paint.
Yeah,
on
and
the front hub.
that's when you realise the disadvantage of the Thunderbird colour scheme, wherein everything, absolutely everything, is in the vehicle colour.
Yes,
So you can't just slap a bit of black paint on it.
That was funny because I remember disassembling the new rear suspension units and blasting off the perfectly good paint on them because they got to be blue.
That's right, they're going to be blue. And it is there's a lot of blue involved in mine because mine is polychromatic blue. And again, I'm indebted to Ray for steering me in the direction of the actual paint that we use, because there were 2 or 3 options we were looking at, and Ray pointed out from the benefit of experience that the kind of paint we should go for had a more grainy look to it. And correct me if I'm wrong, was because that would more accurately reflect the early...
It's actually quite difficult to replicate, and just to make the picture clear, we always, rather than go for some of these exotic expensive mixes that try and replicate down to the, within a tenth of a shade of the original colour, we'll very often use these people to provide a sample that we can then match to the nearest possible proprietary paint code that is readily available, so that if in the future you have a mishap with a toolbox lid or something like that, you can just literally get it blown in by just about anybody from a standard stock colour. And unfortunately, we're still in contact with the painter who used to be the paint guy at Bourne Brothers. Is now self-employed, so that's lovely because he preserved all the old records from way back, so that's great. But the problem always is that remember 1955, metallic paints certainly in the UK were in their infancy. And it wasn't a crystal clear metallic. It was a little bit dirty and a little bit muddy. So it was actually trying to get as close to that as we possibly could with a modern paint. And I've seen people, and even the former senior partner at Bourne Brothers, who had a Bonnie of that era, and the colour he painted it in, it looked like something from the Crystal Maze. Yes, it was blue. Yes, it was metallic. But there the similarity ended. It just looked so phony. But I think on yours we really did nail it.
Yeah, I think the almost gunmetal-like hue to it gives it a real kind of macho look compared to the dinky toys you can end up with.
Well, the blue is very significant in my story. It's always been a favourite colour of mine anyway, but I got that from my father. And interestingly enough, throughout his life, and again, I go back to the fact that he was very quiet. He never mentioned that he regretted having to trade his bike in. He never said that. But lo and behold, every chance he got to have a car, whether it was a company car, as his, through his working life, if he got a company car, or even his own, it would be a shade of that colour, or the nearest he could get to that shade of blue. And I look back now, I could reel off several off the top of my memory. If there was a blue option, he would have it.
Fantastic.
And so he got to see the bike, and he's got to see it running, and that was the end game.
Yeah.
And I even, just for fun, took his ashes on a little tour.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, bless.
I strapped him into the tank bag, and because he obviously couldn't ride it, I thought, we're going for a ride, Dad. So, I took him for a big long ride around Hertfordshire, which is where he was born, in Cambridgeshire, and we went on for a bigger ride, and so completed the story, completed the circle.
Fantastic.
Yeah. He'd have laughed at that.
I'll bet. So now the Thunderbird is fully back on the road. Is there any interesting things you've done, shows you've been to? You came to the local village fete with us to help fly the RJM flag fantastically. And is there anything planned for the future?
Yeah, there's been quite a few interesting things. Again, all tied into that general title of riding the restoration back in. I mean, for example, after said fate, the heavens opened as I was on the way home, and I thought, well, it's only water, water sinks battleships. It can't be that bad. So I thought, well, it's not far back to my home in Bedford from Arlesey. It'll be all right. And I thought, bugger, my lovely clean bike that I'd polished up for the show is going to get rather mucky. Halfway home, splutter, cough, die. I pull over. Thankfully, the lights were still on, obviously, because it's a separate circuit, and I could not get it started for love nor money. And then it occurred to me that, of course, my kill switch, my lovely shiny kill switch, is mounted on the handlebar and would have been flooded. Mm-hmm. So I thought, right, I need WD-40. It was the only thing I could think of as a possible cure to get it going. I thought, I knew it must be water ingress of some sort, and I hoped it was something simple. So I pushed the bike back to the local garage in Shefford, and got under cover, and I set about spraying WD-40 liberally everywhere I could think of that it might create I flush out the water, and I think it was mainly in the kill switch, and thankfully after about 5 or 10 minutes it came back to life. So lesson learned there. And on another occasion I went to a classic bike meet over in Oxfordshire, I think it was, and place was ram-packed and had a lovely day, and on the way home I was coming up to this roundabout, and as I accelerated off the roundabout, the headlight decided to make a big bid for freedom. Obviously I'd not secured it sufficiently well after having gone in to check out some wiring or do something, and off it set off down the road Barnes Wallis style.
Oh no.
And
wow.
yes.
Okay.
And I'm instantly thinking, oh, blow. My headlights can be smashed to smithereens. So I pulled over, and at that point I realised that the lug, which sits at a right angle to the centre stand piece to enable you to locate it with your foot, the lug had gone. It had disappeared, and I think it had snapped off back at the show, where the guys we were putting the bikes on the centre stands on a grassy area, and they'd given us, everyone's already got a plank of wood.
Oh, a plank of wood.
And
old school.
Yeah, I think mine had leant over or something. It might have snapped off there and then, or 60-year-old centre stand at some point, fatigue set in. But whatever, I could not basically stand the bike up while I ran back to get the bits for my headlight.
Oops.
So there was a guy on a motorcycle on the other side of the dual carriageway. He came up, went round the road, but came down, and he said, "You all right?" I said, "Would you mind holding my bike?" So he very sportingly held the bike while I ran back, and a miracle had occurred. The wire.
Still own a headlamp.
Yes, the very same headlamp. It was intact. Everything else was bashed to bits, but it had done its job. So all I needed was a new chrome rim and a replacement bit of wiring and connection, and was back on the road.
Good job.
And I got a new centre stand, and I actually cheekily replaced the centre stand with a slightly later model, and that has made a huge difference to getting it upright on the stand safely. It's almost a 2-finger affair now.
Yeah, but I mean, very often, and again, 55, you weren't too many years forward from the rear wheel stands. I mean, centre stands would have been in their infancy, and as the years go by, they do modify these things for ease of use. So very often you find you can take advantage of slightly later kit.
Yes.
I mean, to be fair, as we did when we were in the engine, because obviously you had the choice of whether we got your rods re-white metalled or whether we took the sensible option of reverting to some later rods with separate shell bearings, so you would never have that problem again. But and that was partly as a result of us struggling to find anybody outside California who could actually re-babbit the rods. But as we now know, subsequently, we found an engineering firm that we use quite a lot for a range of things, literally, who have their business premises partway between you and I, who could have done the job.
No, good old T&L.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that, but that's the thing, the bike would never have achieved what it's achieved if it wasn't for the work that you and Rowan did.
Thank you.
And that's absolutely, I'm happy to talk merrily about that to anybody that asks me, how did you do it? Did you do it all on your own? I said, well, no, because I couldn't have done. And in fact, to do it all again now, no, I still wouldn't. I'd do the same. And in terms of, well, what does the future lie? Where does the future lie with the bike? Well, I've since completed just over 4,000 miles since we put it back live on the road.
Yeah.
In about, a couple of years now, has it been?
Yeah, I think so.
And the intention is to ride it, not hide it.
Lovely.
And I'm going to do just for fun, I'm going to replicate that ride that my father would have done.
Yeah.
Up to East Kirby and back to Hitchin, just to see what it was like. It would be different roads. I know it's going to be all changed, but I'll probably stay up in a hotel overnight and come back on the next day. Mm-hmm. So I intend to do that. And I actually hold another idea, which I sometimes you've got to dream big, but I had the idea that once I completely got as much as possible the reliability, sorted down, and I felt more comfortable about dealing with things at the side of the road should they occur, I quite fancied shipping it across to the States.
Oh,
Nice.
And riding it down from somewhere like, I don't know, the East Coast all the way down to Phoenix in Arizona, where my friend Frank is, who does his own British bike fettling. So it's just an idea.
That's
a dream.
That's a goal. I wholeheartedly approve of that.
Yeah, because that's what it's for. And there is also something magical about, to me, the name of the bike, its logo, the Thunderbird logo.
Which is also emblazoned on your T-shirt right now, I must mention.
And on the back of my phone.
So very nice.
On my case.
That's quite strange. A phone built 60 years after the motorcycle was.
It's a native Indian mythological character, though, isn't it?
It is. Yes, I was about to say that. Thanks, Ray. Yes, and that's part of the reason. One of the reasons I wanted to do that. I had this dream about getting it over there because actually it is a one of their many. The Navajo Indian had many gods for various different things according to seasons or sunshine or wind or rain, and the Edward Turner apparently was scratching his head looking for a name, and he was driving through America,
right?
And he saw the name, the Thunderbird.
Really?
I didn't know that.
Yes, I read something fairly recently that he got inspired. Now I don't know if it was through an advert he saw or for something else, but certainly in South America, south of the USA, the Thunderbird is known as the god of thunder because it's a big eagle, and as it flaps its wings in mythology, it creates the thunderous clap of sound. So maybe he was inspired by that. I don't know, but it became notorious for holding the world land speed record, the Thunderbird engine at Bonneville.
Yeah.
So I think he had one eye on the American market back then.
So that brings this run of episodes to a close. You've been listening to me, Rowan, my father Ray, and in this episode, our dear friend Jeremy. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and give us a review on iTunes. Just a reminder, our website is rjmclassic.com, and you can contact me directly about the podcast at rjmpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Let's do this again sometime.